Hello, I have been reading some of the stories on this site and decided to share this story. This took place around 2012 or 2013, my memory is kind of fuzzy. At that time I was not living the healthiest of lifestyles. In 2012 I was laid off from a decent job that I landed in 2010. I was unemployed for about 3 to 4 months. Eventually I decided to contact a temp agency, so that I can get a temp job. I worked many dead-end jobs, and got to meet a bunch of people. Some were cool, others were not, and some were complete weirdos. At one of these jobs I met a guy around my age, that I got along with. We would contact each other about potential jobs or whatnot, and just hang out. I guess you could say that we were friends. When we would work together our conversations were often about making money quickly. We never actually took action, because we did not know how. One day I guess Mikey decided that I was trustworthy enough to tell me about this project he had been working on. He told me that he knew this guy that people called Guro. That is how Mexicans call light-skinned Mexicans. Anyway, he told me that this guy was the son of a narco. According to Mikey, back in the early 90s many of the traffickers crossed to the US for the sole purpose of having children with American women. I guess this was a way of having people on the inside. This Guro guy apparently had land that he inherited. Guro had told Mikey that if he gets his growing license, he would be able to grow on his land, and get a cut from the crop. Mikey thought it sounded like a good idea, but didn't want to do it alone. This is where I come in. He said that it would be easy money. So, with some convincing I agreed to join him on this project. This specific license allowed people to grow less than 100 plants. Mikey and I managed to get one each. We then decided to meet Guro up so we can talk about getting started. So, we went to this seafood place and met the guy. It was my first time meeting him, so I was kind of nervous. The conversation we all had was not related to the project. We then went to a Home Depot parking lot, and spoke about the operation and what he needed from us. He basically told us that all we had to do was plant the seeds, help harvest, and that the money was ours. He reassured us that the crop was already sold. So, I thought we don't have to touch it and we still get paid. This was too good to be true, and like all things that seemed that way, it certainly was. But like young dumb kids we ignored that voice in our head and proceeded. We shortly went to this guy's rancho and he showed us the space where we were going to plant the seeds. The area was surrounded with other plants and small trees. I'm guessing to hide it from plain view. He then told us to return in 1 week, and to memorize the streets, so that we don't have to use GPS. By this time the seeds had germinated, and we helped plant them. Guro then treated us to lunch and Mikey and I left. He called us about a week later, and said not to go back for about 6 months. I don't know much about growing, but he told us that the seeds that we planted were going to be ready in that time span. So, we agreed and we kind of waited patiently. 6 months passed and Mikey called Guro to see if it was okay for us to go over. Guro told us not to go and to wait till this specific date, because he noticed some helicopter flying around. We then waited for the date and showed up. When we got there, we noticed that a lot of our plants had been torn out of the dirt. Guro approaches us and says, "Somebody came last night and stole your plants." Mikey and I were kind of stuck, not knowing what to say. Obviously, this was bullshit. We knew that he had his people help harvest so we don't get as big of a cut as we were promised. Being that we did not know, If this guy was violent, we just kind of played along with it and acted disappointed. He then said, "I'm really sorry guys," with this stupid smile on his face, and then said he'll make it up to you guys. He went to the back of his pickup and gave us each 6 pounds of crap. Maggie and I were kind of like okay with that. Maggie and I just wanted to get out of there, so we stuck it in the trunk of my car and took off. We were obviously pissed at the fact that things didn't go the way we planned. But we got over it fast because, as I mentioned before, it seemed too good to be true. Since Maggie still lived with his parents, I decided that I will stash the herb at my place. At that time, I was staying in this small studio behind my parents' house, so I was less likely to get caught. Now I have 12 pounds of herb in my place and no one willing to buy in bulk. I decided to start moving it in small quantities. I would sell a $20 bag here and there, sometimes in 1/8 and rarely an ounce. I kept doing that for a while. I managed to sell close to a pound in small quantities. This was not going to cut it, though I did not want it at my place anymore. I told Maggie that we had to get it out as soon as possible. He told me that his uncle worked for a guy that was known to buy large quantities. He said that he would talk to him to see if he was interested. I agreed and waited patiently. A week or so later he calls me up and says that his uncle's boss wants to see the herb and possibly buy it. We both got really excited and happy, so we set up a meeting with this guy. He tells us to go over to his place on a Thursday. Thursday comes, and I go to Mike's house with the product stashed where my spare tire should be. We get in the car and start our 1-hour journey to this guy's house. We finally get to this gentleman's house, and he lives in this rural area. There is a long dirt road, and each side of it is lined with fields of what seem to be orange trees. We ride up to his house, and I remember noticing some really nice cars out in front. I think it was 2 really nice Silverados, a yellow Mustang, and a blue Camaro. Maggie then attempts to call the gentleman's cell, and there is no answer. So, we are kind of just parked in front of this guy's house, which is nerve-wracking. I felt paranoid, maybe due to too many movies. Eventually this young guy comes out of the house to feed some scary-looking dogs that were roaming freely about the property. He notices my car and approaches in this aggressive manner. He had one hand behind his back, like if he was getting ready to pull a gun on us. I asked Maggie who that was, and he told me that it is the buyer's oldest son. Maggie opens the doors and pokes his head, and calls him by name. Thankfully they knew each other. Let's call this guy Sergio. Sergio greets Maggie, and Maggie proceeds to introduce me to him. Sergio is kind of hesitant and just kind of nods his head at me. Sergio asks us if we have his dad's package. I say yes, and he tells us to go inside his house. The house was a mess. I think only men lived there, or maybe it was a temporary house. He leads us to the kitchen and pulls a scale out from under the sink. As he bends down to get it, I notice that he has a handgun in his waist on his lower back. I give Maggie a look and he just kind of looks away. Sergio then tells me to get the pounds, and I do. While I'm getting the duffel bags that contains the product, one of his dogs starts sniffing me and I kind of jump back. Sergio looks at the situation and laughs at me. He tells me to come, and then he proceeds to weigh the herb. He cracks a pound open, smells it, and gives us a sign with his hands that it is okay product. Shortly after he weighs the first pound, we hear an engine turn off and someone opening the door. His dad is now home, and is wondering who this strange kid is, me. He greets Maggie and his son, and in this stern voice asks who I am. Maggie lies and says that I am a sister's boyfriend. I'm sure he thought this would help the situation, but it didn't. Since this guy was a close family friend, he took me by the shoulder and walked me to this large window. He said, "So you're dating Mike's sister?" I answered yes. He said, "Do you know how to behave?" I said yes. Then he looks out the window and points at this huge tree that has what looks like rope hanging from it, and says a lot of people have died on that tree. You don't want to be next. Treat her with respect. I agreed and we kind of stared at each other. I was trying not to show any sort of emotion. He laughed and walked me back to the kitchen. He then grabs a bud from the scale, smells it and puts it in his shirt pocket. He asks how many pounds there are. We say 11 and he hands over a bunch of cash. He says the herb is fine, but it looks like there is a little mold on it. Since you are what's his name's nephew, I will take it off your hands but at a discounted price. We did not care. All we wanted was to get rid of the product. We said thank you and walked out. As we left, he says, "Maggie, make sure your friend behaves. If he doesn't, bring him to me." Maggie laughs and nods his head. We get in the car and drive off. I park in this gas station and we count the money. He gave us 9,000 to split between us. This is much lower than what Maggie promised us, but it was good enough. Since I did the driving, Maggie decided that I should keep 5,000. Obviously I agree and pocket the cash. We head back to town and I drop Maggie off. We continued to be friends, but we never pulled something like this again. I am now with his sister and have a kid with her. Crazy world, right? Anyways, that's my story. I know it was long, and that I could have left some parts out. I hope you enjoyed it. I have other stories similar to this, but I may, or may not share them.
Thanks for watching Reddit videos. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Click the right box for the Reddit videos playlist. Share your own stories in the comments below.